Hey friends, it's Steph, baker, engineer, triathlete, and today I'm going to be teaching you how I make my carrot cake jars. There aren't very many specific tools that are needed for this recipe, which is one of the reasons I love it. So you can get by with just a basic sheet pan. So this is a 9x13. This is what works best with the recipe I'm going to show you guys, but you can work with basically any size. You'll just have to vary how many jars you get out of it. I use the 9x13 because it gets me a nice clean 6 jars and then some scraps. Of course, you'll need the jars themselves. Make sure they're the wide mouth jars, not the ones that narrow in. Otherwise you won't be able to get the cake into the jar without crumbling it. And that's one of the key differences between my cake jars and some other ones that I've seen out there is I don't crumble my cake. I put it in full sheet layers, which makes for a better bite and it also doesn't dry out as fast. On the topic of jars, you also want a cookie cutter that is the same size as your jar. You can measure the diameter of your jar and then order one online. Worst case, I have attempted to cut the cake with the jar itself, but it takes a lot of time. So if you could find a cookie cutter, that's best case scenario. And then when we get to the filling part, it's really nice to have a piping bag, but in a pinch you can use a Ziploc bag and a piping tip to make it look nicer, although you can just kind of snip the end off the piping bag since we're smushing it in a jar anyways, the designs don't actually come out to be that delicate. So you can get away with just cutting the end and having a round tip. So we're gonna start by taking our cookie cutter and pressing into the sheet cake. So if it makes 6 jars, they're all 2 layers, I need to get 12 chunks out of this. It's gonna be 4 along each side, 3 down the middle, and then the last one is a half and a half. So you want to start by doing your first cookie cutter way at the corner. The edges shouldn't be crispy, but they're a little bit tougher. So I like to just trim the edges off and push the cookie cutter down so that my first one is pretty much in the corner, but I'm left with just the edge that comes off. There's my first round. Then we go ahead and repeat that all along the far side of the cake. And save these scraps because we'll make a scrap jar or just a scrap bowl with them later. See, now we've gotten to the end of the row and 4 fits just about perfectly. My back row, so same thing, the corner, saving my scraps. Now we are onto the middle row, so you'll see that the cookie cutter fits perfectly in there. So we'll be able to get 3 good ones out of the middle row. And these scraps are my favorite because they have no edge on them. Some people like the crispy edge, I don't. So we take these 2 ends, we're gonna put them together. But we wanna avoid that edge, so we'll do as much as we can. And then we do as much as we can with the other. And now we have what's way too big, so we can cut that middle edge off. Now our circles are prepped, we can prep our piping bag. So insert your piping tip or go with no piping tip. I like to use a cup when I'm filling my piping bags, just makes my life a little bit easier. Last thing we gotta do before we assemble is prep our filling. So for this one, I'm just using Biscoff cookie butter. So I take a few scoops of that, put it into a bowl, and then we're gonna microwave this. Just 30 seconds will get it to be nice and creamy, and that means that it's easier to distribute into our jars. I love using cookie butter as a filling, but one of my other favorites for carrot cake is toasted walnuts. However, this is a great option that is nut-free and also provides a little bit of extra caramely flavor. All right, folks, it's time to assemble now that we've got everything all laid out. So we start with taking one of our carrot cake rounds and plunking it into the jar. I have this long spoon that I like to use to push it down. And I just shuffle around to make sure it's all the way to the bottom. Any teaspoon should work, but if you have a nice long one, it's extra helpful. And then we grab a piping bag and just do a swirl to coat that first layer. Grab our filling, and we add in a nice healthy tablespoon. Drizzle it around. I like to make sure the filling goes all the way to the edges so that when the jar is done, you'll be able to see the filling in the layers. Otherwise, if you put it all in the middle, you won't be able to see it, and you want people to know what's on the inside. Let me grab a second layer of carrot cake, pop it in, tamp it down, and add our frosting. Nice big swirl there, and then on top, drizzle the filling. I like to do this one in little zigzags to give it a bit of an aesthetic appeal, but most people care more about getting a full tablespoon than having it be a pretty drizzle, so I make sure I put a full tablespoon on there. Now, this is it. You could call it right here. Got your nice Biscoff on top, and as you can see in the layers there, Biscoff comes through. This part is optional, but I do like to top all of my cake jars off with something that lets you know what the flavor is. So this is just a Lotus Biscoff cookie, and that pops right on the top, just like that. Here we go. Carrot Biscoff cake jars.